Today's function Air Marshal Naresh Verma, Mr. Peter Remale of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, editor of this excellent volume, Sri Ajay K. Mehra, distinguished panelists, and I'm particularly glad to see young scholars in the audience, because as has been said, this whole area is one which is underexplored, and it is these young scholars who are really going to do then the classic work on the Indian Constitution. Many interesting insights and approaches have been made by the panelists. I will certainly not try and address any of those. I'd rather make just a few general remarks. Firstly, this is a fascinating story. The continuance and the vibrancy of parliamentary democracy in India, with free elections, smooth transfers of power in the state and center, independent judiciary, and very free press and media, is itself a miracle. I think we tend to trash our own achievements. The fact that we are able to, for 70 years, maintain a fully democratic society, which a lot of other post-colonial regimes tried but failed to do, I think is a great achievement. Therefore, to begin with, I must say that the Parliament has been a unique achievement. It has been a unique achievement that it has continued in all these years, and that it continues to be vibrant and central to our governance. My own experience with Parliament has been very interesting. I've been in Parliament for 40 years, 4 terms in the Lok Sabha and 4 terms in the Raj Sabha. And on both houses, both on the Treasury benches and in the opposition. So I've really seen Parliament from all possible angles. And I must say that it has been an absolutely fascinating situation. Of course, there has been a deterioration in the quality of debates. I mean, I recall when I first came to the government, there were these great stalwarts, like there was Hiren Mukherjee, there was Madhu Limai, there was Nath Pai, there was Somnath Chatterjee. There were all these people in the opposition, the Atal Bihari Vajpayee, were really outstanding, and they used to keep the government on its feet. And in the Raj Sabha, there was, for example, Bhupesh Gupta, who single-handedly brought the whole government virtually to a standstill. So we had brilliant debates, structured debates. I remember listening to them. Even before that, I remember we used to come down here particularly to listen to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's reply to the debate on the External Affairs Commission. So the debate on the external affairs was so fascinating, and his reply, it was a tour d'horizon, sort of a Singhavalokan of the entire world. It was an educative experience in itself. And I've had the honor of being either a witness to or a participant in every single election in India since 1952, down to the last one. And so there has been a change, obviously. The sort of people that we had at that time in Parliament, they had come out through the freedom movement, and many of them were extremely talented and extremely outstanding people. There's definitely been a deterioration in the level of debates. There's also been at the same time a democratic transformation. So there's been definitely democratization of Parliament, because as has been mentioned, many submerged classes and submerged areas and submerged groups who were invisible earlier have risen to the surface as a result of our electoral system, because everybody has the vote. So whether it is some very obscure tribe in the northeast, or whether it is a small group somewhere in south, they have their vote. And anywhere where there is a vote, they have a voice. And so all of these, which were previously more or less subsumed under the Congress party, which was sort of an umbrella party, have now broken up and have asserted their own importance. So definitely, let me put it this way: the Parliament today is perhaps more accurately representative of India than it was earlier. Because you see India, you see what we are like. Perhaps it's inevitable that Parliament would also reflect, to some extent, the realities in the country. And so the emergence, for example, of regional parties Now the regional parties, each party subscribing to a special ideology for their constituency. They are all now competing, they're jostling each other for space. And so we have had a transformation and a democratization of Parliament. But the idea of a decline, or the word used by some people that is becoming irrelevant, I think that is entirely unwarranted. I think that is not true. Even today, any legislation that has to be passed by both houses of Parliament, regardless of who is where, how many votes they have. So Parliament remains the mainstay of our democratic structure, of our political structure. If Parliament is becoming irrelevant, then democracy is becoming irrelevant. And if democracy is becoming irrelevant, then where are we going? So I think we must be very careful before we trash or write off what Parliament has done or what Parliament is doing. Having said that, I definitely would say there are some very negative features that I have noticed myself. First of all, the disruptions. The physical disruption of Parliament is totally against the whole system and theory of parliamentary government. It is unacceptable. Although one leader whom I will not mention did say, no, it is a established, or it is an acceptable form of parliamentary government. It is not. Disrupting Parliament, I would say, is almost a criminal act. You're wasting people's money, you're wasting people's time, and you are going against the very basis of democracy, which is debate. By marching into the well of the House, by shouting slogans and physically disrupting the House, what are we doing? We are, as it were, अपने पैर में कुल्हाड़ी लगा रहे हैं. We are weakening the whole system. So that, I'm afraid, is something which is a very serious threat to the parliamentary system. And I'm not making any party thing here. All parties have done it, including one to which I belong, including to various other parties which they've done it. And this business of tit for tat, कि आपने ये किया था तो हम भी ये करेंगे, that is not a mature way of looking at problems, for God's sake. These are not school children trying to get even with each other. These are large and fundamental issues. And the fact that the disruptions have become so frequent, which leaves less time, as has been mentioned, for legislation, less time for debate, less time for discussion. Even today, when there are structured debates, there are good debates. In Rajya Sabha, we had some good debates. I remember, for example, on this West Bengal, the Bangladesh border dispute, how we finally took the major steps. There's a very fine debate upon it. Or there was a debate upon the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. But those are rare. Generally, there's a lot of ho-halla, and that is not acceptable, and something has to be done about that. And I would urge that public opinion should rise against the disruptions in Parliament, because that is something which is really very, very disturbing. Now, television is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's very good that our debates are televised, but on the other hand, what sort of a picture do we give to the general public? When you have disruptions every day, and you expect the public to be disciplined and to be clean and to be such, it doesn't work that way. So we are getting to be very bad role models also. I'm afraid that is also happening. So generally, the deterioration of parliamentary decorum and parliamentary procedure is, I think, something which we have to accept. I wouldn't call it a decline of Parliament. I would call it a deterioration in the parliamentary structure and parliamentary procedure, which has to be remedied as soon as we can. Gender imbalance is something that is mentioned tangentially. We have an all-male panel here, which is very strange because there are some very distinguished women political scientists. But the Women's Reservation Bill, as a bill which is supported both by the Congress and the BJP, and between us, we've got comfortable majorities in both houses, not being passed. We passed it in the Rajya Sabha when 2 members had to be physically lifted and thrown out of the House. And they tore the bill and threw it at the face of whoever it was. I don't know, Dr. Manmohan Singh, kaun kar rahe the bichare. And wo passed, but it's not being passed. Now, have you thought why it is not being passed? I don't want to go into that because, I don't want to make an akshep on any particular political party, but it's very clear because some communities feel that by a women's reservation bill, they will be again thrown back and they will not get adequate representation. So I think, for example, women's reservation bill, 1/3 reservation is a very, very significant step. It should be taken. But there's no public opinion in favor of it. There's public opinion in favor of a lot of other things, but not in favor of women's. Nobody talks about women's reservation. They've forgotten about the bill. ठीक है पढ़ा हुआ, let it be, for God's sake, क्यों उठा रहे हो? So there's a sort of, what I'm trying to say is that the public mood is reflected in Parliament, and parliamentary behavior is reflected in the public. It is a parasparam bhavaya. So both act and interact on each other, which is as it should be. So I think that is something which needs concern. The media explosion is something which is quite astounding. When we started off in Parliament, there was only those two boring channels, DD1 and DD2. Now there are 500 channels, for God's sake. And every evening people go in, the channels are now beginning to revolve around the anchors, which is another very curious thing. So you look at the anchor rather than at the channel. And then, there's the photographs of these anchors as if they're the great sort of, But anyhow, I don't want to trash the anchors because they're doing a good job. But the fact of the matter is that the way the whole thing is being presented, I think is very strange. They are setting the agenda. Parliament doesn't set the agenda. The agenda is set by the anchors. And the next day the Parliament discusses that very thing. So this is a very curious development. Of course, free press, we are very proud of it, and nobody can even dare hint that they should be modified or controlled in any way, but nonetheless, I think this is a point that needs to be kept in mind. Another point which has not really been mentioned very much is the financing of elections. We talk of corruption. How is it that it is becoming so expensive now to fight elections? Stories go around that even to get a ticket, you got to spend vast sums of money. Election ki to baat chodo. To get the ticket, to get the mandate, you spend vast sums of money. Then you spend vast sums of money to get elected. Where does that money come from? We've tried some developments have now happened. There are new electoral bonds and so on. But we've only touched the surface of this issue. And a lot of the corruption, if I may say so, flows from the fact that our elections are so expensive. And when vast sums of monies are involved, where will they come from and how will they be repaid? Koi daan to karta nahi hai. Nobody gives you charity. If somebody gives you 1 crore rupees, he expects 1.25 crore in return. So this is an area which I don't think has been covered very well in the book. But I think it's central to the democratic transformation of Parliament, because unless we are able to do something about that, there's lots of, I don't want to go into the details, there are state financing of elections and so on. There are lots of proposals which the Election Commission has put before the country. But this is something I think that needs more. Now, let me finally, because my 10 minutes are up, or do I have 15? No, I don't have, no. I don't want, I have 15, no good, I have 5 minutes extra, good for you. The PM has called for a national debate on simultaneous elections. Now, this is something which I think all political scientists particularly will have to concentrate upon. My immediate reaction, I must tell you, as a student of political science is that I have two major objections to this. The first objection is that I think it goes against the basic structure of the Constitution. Because the basic structure of the Constitution is federal. And each of the states in its own area is given autonomy, if you like, if you want to use that word, given freedom. Now, if you put all the elections together and within 1 year a state government falls, for any reason, what are you going to do for 4 years? Are you going to have governor's rule for 4 years? How is it possible with 29 different units, with all so many different parties? Every political party in India has had the chance of being in power somewhere or the other, in the states to in the center. Now, with all these diverse political pulls, how are you going to herd them all into one structure? And then if there's something, the whole thesis of parliamentary democracy is that it has got to, the executive has got to enjoy the majority in the House. If the executive loses a majority in the House, then what happens? So you get them all together once and then they'll again start bitching. And my hunch is, I'm not a legal luminary, my hunch is that the Supreme Court would strike down such a proposal as being against the basic structure of the Constitution. That is my view. It is not a totally crystallized view. There are lots of arguments against it, but that's what I feel as a student of political science. Question hour is, as Harold Lasky points out in his classic Parliamentary Government in England, the question hour is of the essence of Parliament. Because any member can ask a supplementary, any member can ask a question. Now the question hours also are getting disrupted. I think that is extremely unfortunate. Because people may think that question hours are not really important. It is not true. It is the question hour that keeps the government on its toes. I know I've been answering questions for 10 years in Parliament. How much work the minister has to do to prepare for the question. Whether DPD asks the supplementary or not is besides the point. I must be ready to answer him. So, it keeps the government on their toes. So question hour uda diya jaye, so then, you're really putting down the individual MP. I think that is something which is not acceptable. So I don't want to really go into this whole thing anymore. I think I'd like to congratulate, first of all, Ajay Mehra again for this splendid, it's going to be a sort of a basic, not only basic reference book, but a basic text for all students of parliamentary government, of political science, of the sociology, of the interaction between various groups, as is mentioned, various subgroups, how they work and how they interact with each other. Very valuable volume. Thank you very much, Ajay, and thank you, IIC and the Stiftung for getting together such a distinguished group of intellectuals to make this volume possible. So, good luck. Have some faith in the Parliament. Don't trash it. Thank you. Good night.